Alright, so here I have drawn the framework of an HR diagram. If you want to review what an HR diagram is, I encourage you to look back at the previous week's videos on the HR diagram. Sorry. So, let's say that we have an HR diagram here, but the normal HR diagram, the one that I talked about last week, kind of in theory, what's on there is supposed to be like all stars. It's not really all stars, obviously, but it's supposed to be representative of all the stars that exist. But what if instead of trying to put all stars, or representatives of all stars, on an HR diagram, what if we just took one cluster? We found one cluster, a group of stars that all formed together from a collapsing molecular cloud, and we're just going to plot all of them on the HR diagram. What would happen then? Well, what should happen, these are all going to be, main sequence stars, right? I mean, at least they're all going to start out as main sequence stars. That's how all stars start. You can't start as not a main sequence star. And these clusters can have a lot of stars, they can have like 1,000 stars in them or more. So we should think that we would start to see the same normal shape of the main sequence. It kind of goes up, and then it goes over a little bit, and then it starts to go up again, and oh, what the heck? What's going on? What is happening here? This is the shape that the stars in the cluster make when you plot them on the HR diagram. You see a normal looking main sequence here, but then it veers off into this range with the giants. This is where the giants live. So what's up with that? Well, here's the deal. See, since clusters tend to be so large, they tend to have a few thousand stars in them, we can reasonably assume that at the time the cluster started, when all those stars became stars, again at roughly the same time, that there should have been at least a few really high temperature, high mass stars, some O-types, some B, A-types, those kinds of things, the stars that would be up here in the main sequence. They should have existed in this cluster, but they don't. Why is that? Well, here's why. If you recall, we have a relationship between the main sequence lifetime of a star and how massive it is. Low mass stars have very long lifespans, and high mass stars have short lifespans. Now, given that we think that when this cluster formed, it should have had some of these really high mass stars, but we can now see that it doesn't. What we can conclude is that the reason the cluster no longer has these high mass stars is because it's been around long enough that all the really high mass stars it had originally have already left the main sequence. They've turned into a giant, or maybe they've even gone supernova, depending on the situation. Here's the useful thing about this is, now, not only can we can tell how old this cluster is, right? We know that all the stars up here aren't there. Maybe they're over here now, or maybe they're just totally gone. So, we also know about how long we think these stars are going to live, so we can tell that this cluster must be older than any of them. By the same token, these stars that are in this area, there are main sequence stars that are this big in this cluster, and we know how long a lifespan we think these stars end up having. So between these stars still being alive, we can conclude that the cluster must be younger than these stars' lifespans. So now we have a really nice range. It's got to be older than these guys and younger than these guys. You can get this down to like really quite good ranges, astronomically speaking. It's a really powerful technique. This is called the main sequence turnoff method, because of how it seems like the main sequence turns off right about there in a cluster. And you use that to figure out how old a cluster is, which is a pretty neat and useful thing that you can do, in my opinion. So yeah, I think that about covers the main sequence turnoff. Go ahead and do the assignment for this week. It doesn't really use the main sequence turnoff directly, but some of these ideas can be useful. So go ahead. Good luck.